A nurse receives orders to end a life and begins to remove the tubes from a young woman in a coma. But what she hears makes her call the police. The hallway smelled of weak coffee and disinfectant. It was 6:30 in the morning when Mary Louisa Carter walked through the reception area of St. Mary's General Hospital, adjusting her gown and pulling her hair into a hasty bun. Her shift was about to begin, and she already knew the routine by heart. Exams, changing dressings, checking medications. But even though there were so many patients, there was one room that always made her heart beat slower. At the end of the hallway, in the soft gloom of the cold light, was the bed of Camille Jameson, 22 years old, 4 months in a coma. Her body was still young, but motionless, as if time had stopped for her. Mary always wondered what was going on behind those closed eyes. The file story was short. Victim of a hit and run, the driver was never found. The only relative, her father, came on the day of the accident. He stayed for a few minutes and left in a hurry, saying he had more important things to do and that if necessary, just call him. He never came back. Mary put her hand on the doorknob, took a deep breath and went in. The room was silent. Only the constant beeping of the heart monitor broke the heavy air. She approached slowly, as she always did, and pulled back the curtain to let in the morning light. "Good morning, my girl," she said softly, tucking the sheet around Camille's body. "Did you sleep well? Look, it's a beautiful sunny day outside." It was like this every day. Mary spoke to her as if she could answer. She told her simple things, that the coffee in the kitchen was bad, that her colleague had arrived late, that the doorman's son had passed his university exam. As she spoke, she ran a warm cloth over Camille's face and hands, removing any traces of dust or dry skin. "Your hair is all messy today, isn't it?" Liv smiled, taking the brush and running it slowly through her hair, as if combing a little girl's hair. "But I take care of it. I'll always take care of it." Camille's hand was cold as always. Mary held it for a few seconds, feeling that heavy silence that seemed to stick to her chest. I know you're not listening to me," she said, looking at the motionless face. "But I'm going to keep coming here until you wake up." Outside, someone called her name. She answered quickly, but she was slow to let go of Camille's hand. She closed her eyes for a moment and said a little silent prayer, as she did every day. Then she adjusted the pillow, checked the equipment, and took one last look before leaving. Deep down, she couldn't explain why, but that little girl moved something very deep inside her. Mary was writing something in another patient's file when she felt a presence behind her. She turned around and saw Dr. Harris, the head of the team, with a piece of paper in his hand. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't blinking. He was just looking at her as if he were carrying a weight, or perhaps as if he had grown accustomed to carrying it. "Carter," his voice was low but firm. "I need you to sign this." She took the paper without understanding and began to read. It was only a few lines, but every word seemed to weigh a ton. "I authorize the removal of life support. Signed, Joseph Jameson. Father, justification written in a hurry in the corner. I can't go on with this. I'm tired of waiting. I don't have any money." Mary blinked several times as if wanting the letters to change on their own. "Doctor," her voice came out broken, "does this mean yes?" "Yes," he replied quickly, almost coldly. "The family has authorized it. It's the end." Carter felt his heart tighten as if someone were squeezing it from the inside. He clutched the paper tightly, he took a deep breath, but his throat was closed. "But 4 months. He tried to argue, his voice trembling. "He's so young." The doctor looked away as if he didn't want to get into that conversation. "I know you love him, but sometimes you have to accept it. There's nothing else we can do." 4 months with no answer, and the family gave their consent. Mary stood still, staring at the document, trying to understand how a piece of paper could decide whether a life would continue or not. The air seemed heavier, the hallway quieter, and her father asked almost in a whisper, "Is he coming, or is he just authorizing it from afar?" He didn't send him with a relative. He said to let him know if anything happened. It was then that Mary realized her fingers were shaking. She folded the paper slowly, feeling as if each fold were a blow to her chest. It wasn't just a doctor's order. It was like turning off a light that was still shining, even if it was weak. She knew that on paper it was routine, but in her heart it seemed like a silent crime. The hallway seemed longer that day. Mary's every step echoed, and the sound of her own shoes against the cold hospital floor sounded like a clock counting down. Time left. When she reached the door, she stopped. Her hand hung in the air, hesitating on the handle, as if opening that room would also open a wound that she would not be able to close. She pushed the door open slowly. The room was plunged into an almost terrifying silence, broken only by the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, but at that moment the sound seemed louder, more insistent, as if each beep were a plea not to let her go. Mary closed the door carefully, walked over to the bed and sat down in the chair next to it. Her eyes fixed on Camille's serene face, which seemed to be in a deep sleep as always. A few strands of hair fell over her forehead, and Mary brushed them away gently, as a mother would when tucking in her daughter. "Forgive me, child," she whispered, her voice breaking. She took Camille's hand. It was cold, thin, so light it seemed like glass. Mary wrapped both hands around it, trying to warm it, as if somehow she could bring her back to life through touch. She took a deep breath, but the air burned in her chest. Her eyes began to burn too, and her vision blurred. She ran her fingertips over the young woman's arm, smoothed the sheet, and without realizing it, began to speak. Today, God asked me to tell you. But how do I do that? Hey, her voice broke in the middle of the sentence. How do I let go of this hand? The VIP was becoming more and more present. Mary rested her forehead on the edge of the bed, smelling the clean sheet mixed with the faint smell of medicine. I know you won't answer, but I would love for you to, even if it's just to say that everything is okay. A tear fell silently and wet the sheet. She lifted her face, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and held the girl's cold hand again, this time more tightly, as if refusing to let go. The room grew even more silent. Mary stood there, just feeling the weak, almost imperceptible breathing and repeating softly like a mantra that no one else could hear. Forgive me. Forgive me. She moved the chair closer to the bed, took a deep breath, and with trembling hands began what she had promised herself she would never do. He carefully held the tube that was helping Camille breathe. His fingers were shaking more than usual, and the steady sound of the monitor now seemed like a drum beating inside his head. Forgive me, he whispered again, almost without a voice. The moment she began to disconnect the first connection, a strange sound broke the silence. It was low, dragging, as if coming from far away. Don't leave me. He's coming back. Mary froze. Her heart raced, and for a second she couldn't breathe. She looked around as if expecting to find someone behind her, but there was no one there. She turned back to Camille, who was still lying there, eyes closed, face motionless. Camille called out in a trembling voice, bringing her face closer. Nothing. The room returned to the same suffocating silence as before, only the insistent beep marking the passing of time. Mary stood motionless, not knowing if she had really heard it, or if her mind was playing tricks on her. She felt a shiver run down the back of her neck. This couldn't be real, she muttered to herself, trying to catch her breath, but the sound continued to echo in her head, word for word, as if it was still being whispered in her ear. With her heart still racing, Mary ran to the door and called, "Dr. Vega, come quickly." The resident doctor rushed in. What happened? I think she spoke. Dr. Vega raised an eyebrow, walked over to the bed, and stood watching. Let's wait a little, she said, looking at the machines. If she spoke, it could be a sign. The two of them stood there still, listening for any sound. 1 minute, 2, 3. Nothing but the monitor and the air conditioner. Mary felt the weight of disappointment and doubt growing at the same time. It must have been my imagination, she whispered, running her hand over her face. But when she looked back at Camille, something took her breath away. The young woman's eyes seemed moister. It wasn't sweat, they were tears. Small, almost imperceptible, but they were there, and that couldn't be her imagination. Mary stayed a few seconds longer by the bed, as if an invisible force was keeping her there. She tried to convince herself that she had done everything she could, but her body wouldn't obey. She looked at Camille's face, her slow breathing, the heavy silence in the room, and took a step back, ready to leave when something in the corner of her eye made her stop. It was so quick that she almost thought she had imagined it. She looked back at Camille's right hand. The finger moved. It was a tiny movement, almost a spasm, but so clear that it made Mary's heart race. She approached, holding her breath as if any sound could take that moment away. Camille called softly, afraid of sounding silly. "Did I imagine it, or did you?" The hand remained motionless again. Mary stood there leaning over her, observing every detail. The slightly long fingernails, the pale skin, the tip of the finger that still seemed to vibrate from what it had done seconds before. It was impossible. Doctors' books. Everyone said that someone in a deep coma couldn't respond voluntarily. But inside Mary, something screamed that it hadn't been a reflex. It had been a sign. Her chest filled with a mixture of fear and hope. She ran her fingertips over Camille's hand, trying to feel any reaction again. "If that was you, do it again. Just one more time." Nothing. The silence returned. It was so heavy that it seemed to push the walls inward. Mary closed her eyes for a moment, trying to convince herself that she wasn't losing her mind. But when she opened them, she still had a clear image of the finger moving, small, fast but real, and that was enough to plant a seed of doubt and a spark she couldn't extinguish inside her. Mary stood at the door for a few seconds, her heart pounding, her head filled with voices telling her she was wrong, that she was going to get herself into trouble. But there was something stronger than any rule at that moment. She took a deep breath, closed the door behind her, and returned to the bed. She looked at the tubes, the machines, the motionless body, sat down again, rested her elbows on her knees, and took Camille's hand in both of hers. The skin was still cold, but not as cold as in the morning. "I'm not turning anything off today," she said quietly, as if telling a forbidden secret. "Can they scold me? They can fire me, but not today." The clock on the wall read 7:30 p.m. Her shift was over, but she didn't leave. She asked another nurse to cover her patients. She said she had a delicate case and stayed there alone with the soft light of the lamp illuminating the pale face of the young woman. Mary began to speak as she did every day, but this time more carefully, more slowly, as if each word could break through that invisible barrier of the coma. "You know, Camille, today in the kitchen they made chicken soup. It was awful, but I ate it thinking of you. I remembered that you once ate something like that when you were a child." She remained silent for a few seconds, watching. Then she brought Camille's hand to her own face, as if wanting to pass on some of the warmth she felt. "If you can hear me, squeeze my hand," she whispered, her heart in her mouth. She waited. The sound of the monitor was the only thing that answered her. "Please, just to know that you're here," she insisted, her eyes filled with tears. Nothing. Time seemed to drag on. Mary adjusted the pillow, wiped the girl's face with a damp cloth, and combed her loose hair. Then she kept talking. She told stories about her childhood, about her brother's mischief, about the times she almost got in trouble at school. "You're not alone, even if it seems like it. I'm here," she said firmly, holding that hand as if it held a whole lifetime. Dawn broke. Outside, the hospital slept in silence, interrupted only by hurried footsteps in the hallway from time to time, but Mary did not move. Her eyes were heavy with sleep, but she kept her hand firmly on Camille's, as if it were a bridge connecting the two of them. And deep down, she felt that bridge had to hold no matter what it took. The clock on the wall read almost 3 hours. The hospital was plunged into a deep silence, broken only by the occasional distant footsteps in the hallway. Mary, exhausted, had her head resting on the edge of the bed, her hand still intertwined with Camille's. Her eyes were blinking slowly, fighting against sleep. It was then that she felt it. First a soft touch, then a squeeze. Weak, hesitant, but unmistakable. Mary raised her head abruptly, her heart racing, and looked at the hand she was holding and saw Camille's fingers close slightly around hers. "My God," she whispered, feeling tears well up instantly. She lowered her face, bringing her hand against her chest as if protecting something precious. "My girl, what happened to you?" she asked, her voice breaking as if expecting an impossible answer and as if the impossible had decided to happen. A faint sound came from Camille's lips, almost a whisper, but with words, "The red house, please." Mary felt her whole body tremble. She leaned closer, trying to hear more, but silence filled the room again. "The red house," she repeated, trying to engrave each syllable in her mind. She quickly took the notebook from her pocket and wrote it down. She sat back down, still holding her hand tightly. Her mind was a whirlwind. What house was that? Why, please, who was he? She looked at Camille's motionless face, now with an expression she had never seen before, something between tension and fear. Still asleep, Mary swallowed hard. She felt that those words carried enormous weight, and she knew that somehow she would have to understand what they meant. The light of morning streamed through the cracks in the curtain, painting the room a soft yellow. Mary was sitting in the same position she had spent the entire night in, still holding Camille's hand. Her body felt sore, her head heavy, but her mind was on high alert. The words from earlier that morning continued to echo in her head like a drum. "The red house, please," and that squeeze of her hand. It wasn't a coincidence, it couldn't be. When she heard footsteps in the hallway, her heart raced. The sound of the doorknob turning made her slowly let go of Camille's hand, trying to appear calm. Dr. Harris entered with the folder under his arm and his usual serious expression. "Good morning, Carter. I'm here too." He didn't finish his sentence. "Let's follow protocol." Mary took a deep breath. She had seconds to decide. She felt her stomach churn, her hands sweat. "Doctor," she began, trying to keep her voice steady. The patient showed signs. He raised his eyebrows, incredulous. "Signs. Carter." "Yes," she interrupted him, looking him straight in the eyes, a neurological response. She moved her finger, and there was a murmur. Harris frowned. "Are you sure about what you're saying?" Mary swallowed hard. "Absolutely. And you know, if there's a response, we can't disconnect her. It would be murder." The doctor was silent for a few seconds, ran his hand over his chin, looked at the equipment, and then at her. "All right, give me a signed report with tests and we'll keep the patient. But I'm going to need a detailed report, very detailed." "I'll do it," he said quickly. "I'll do it," she replied quickly, feeling immediate relief, but also the weight of the lie she had just told, because deep down she wasn't sure it would be accepted as proof, but she needed to buy time. When he left, Mary covered her face with her hands. She felt divided. She knew that technically she had manipulated the situation, but she also knew that if she hadn't, that girl might never have had the chance to tell her story. She looked at Camille, lying there fragile, with a silence that seemed to hide a scream. "I don't know what happened to you, my child," she whispered, approaching her again, "but I'm going to find out, and no one will silence you." At that moment, she understood that she was no longer just caring for a patient. She was protecting a secret, and the truth, whatever it was, now depended on her. In the morning, Mary felt that the hospital looked more crowded than ever. Every hallway, every door seemed to be watching her. Then, in the break between procedures, she sat down at the computer in the nurse's station and opened Camille's admission record. She scrolled through the digital pages one by one until she found the ambulance report that had brought her in. There it was. Patient found unconscious on County Road 12, approximately 2 hula from the town of Sanro. Mary stared at those words as if they were a secret map. Sanro, the red house. Her heart beat faster. She took a piece of paper, wrote down the name and approximate address, and tucked it into her scrub pocket like someone hiding a treasure. Hours later, after her shift had ended, She got in her car and followed the dirt road that led to the village. The sun was strong, but the wind carried the smell of grass and dust. At every turn, the feeling that she was going where she shouldn't was growing. Sanro was small with a few scattered houses and some children playing in the dirt street. She stopped the car near a small shop and approached a woman who was sweeping the sidewalk. "Excuse me, do you know where the red house is?" she asked, trying to sound casual. The woman stopped sweeping, stared at Mary for a few seconds, and then pointed with her chin toward a narrow street on the right. She didn't say a word. Mary thanked her and continued on. At the end of the street, she saw it. The house had faded, peeling red paint, as if no one had taken care of it in years. The windows were broken, some boarded up, but what caught her attention most was the yard. A rusty bicycle leaned against the wall, clothes on the clothesline fluttering in the wind as if someone still lived there. But the silence around her was heavy, no sound of people, no footsteps, no laughter. Mary stood in front of the gate, trying to understand how something could seem so alive and so dead at the same time. A chill ran down her back. In the end, that house didn't just seem like a place, it seemed like a badly buried secret. She clapped her hands, shouted, but nothing. Silence. No one came out. The gate creaked loudly when Mary pushed it. The sound echoed throughout the silent yard, and she stood there for a few seconds, listening to make sure no one would come to ask what she was doing there. Nothing, just the movement of clothes on the clothesline and the soft squeak of an empty swing moving in the wind. She crossed the yard, dodging the things lying around. A dirty teddy bear, a torn shirt, a deflated ball. Everything seemed frozen in time. The front door was ajar. Mary pushed it slowly. The smell of dust mixed with damp filled her nose. The light coming through the cracks revealed particles floating in the air. Moving slowly, he took a few steps. The wooden floor creaking under his feet, old furniture, a table with a stained tablecloth, a worn armchair with a blanket over it. It was as if someone had lived there but had left in a hurry. Then he saw in the corner of the room a small picture frame lying on the floor. The frame was broken and the glass cracked. He bent down to pick it up, but when he touched it, the glass came loose and an old photo fell to the floor. Mary picked it up carefully. The image was somewhat yellowed but still clear. A girl of about 8 years old, with her hair in 2 braids, a shy smile. Next to her, a tall, thin man in a dark shirt. His face was serious, his eyes hard, almost threatening. Even in the photo, Mary's stomach churned. It didn't take her long to recognize the girl's face. It was Camille. She saw that there was something written on the back. She turned the photo over carefully. The handwriting was childish, with large, uneven letters. "Forever, Dad." Mary stared at it, feeling a weight in her chest. It was impossible not to imagine the scene. A little girl, believing that the man next to her was protection, love, when now in his eyes she saw only darkness. The silence in the house felt thicker. Mary closed her eyes for a moment, clutching the photo between her fingers. She felt that this image held something much bigger than a simple memory. It held a piece of the truth that she was just beginning to touch. That's when she heard the faint crunch of pebbles outside, like careful footsteps in the yard. Her heart raced. For a moment she stood still, trying to tell if it was just the wind, or if someone was really approaching. Then a low sound like clothing brushing against the wood of the door came right behind her. Before she could react, a woman's voice, almost a whisper, crossed the air. "If that bastard finds out you're here, you're dead." Mary turned her body suddenly toward the crack in the door. A woman with a face marked by time and sunken eyes stared back at her. The handkerchief on her head was poorly tied, and her hands trembled slightly, as if the courage to speak was much greater than the strength she had. "Who? Who are you?" Mary asked, trying to keep her voice down, but feeling the cold rise down her back. "It doesn't matter who I am," replied the woman, looking nervously from side to side. "What matters is that he must be here soon." He tried to confirm Mary, but the woman raised her hand, asking her to be quiet. Don't ask any questions. Just get out of here now." There was a weight in those words that made Mary swallow hard. It was as if that woman had seen things that no one should ever see. The way she spoke, the look of someone carrying an old fear, left no room for doubt. Something terrible was behind that house. The distant sound of an engine approaching broke the silence. The woman opened her eyes wide and took a step back. "Go," she insisted, almost pushing Mary toward the door. With the photo hidden in her pocket, Mary got up quickly and crossed the yard. She opened the metal gate carefully, but the noise still seemed too loud to her. The moment she set foot on the street, the engine of a car turned the corner. Without thinking twice, Mary quickened her pace, got into her own car, and slammed the door shut. Her hands were shaking on the steering wheel. The last she heard before accelerating was the wooden door of the red house closing slowly, as if guarding a secret that did not want to be discovered. Mary's footsteps echoed through the silent hospital hallway. It was early morning, and she knew that was the only time she could enter the small file room without raising too much suspicion. She had a strange feeling, as if her neighbor's words and the photo she had found in the red house had opened a door that she could no longer close. The key creaked as it turned in the lock. The room was cold with the typical smell of old paper mixed with dust and disinfectant. The metal shelves were full of stacked folders, some were about to fall over. Mary took a deep breath, closed the door, and began to search. Her fingers ran quickly over the last names until they stopped at Jameson Camille. The folder she found was more worn than she had expected. When she opened it, several yellowed sheets fell onto the table. At the top, a document caught her attention. Hospital admission record. The date was 14 years ago. The patient's age, 8 years old. Reason, multiple fractures in the arm and ribs. She read it over and over again. There was no report of a car accident or a fall from a height, just a vague note. Injuries consistent with repeated impact. Mary closed her eyes for a moment, feeling her stomach tighten. She ran her hands over her face, trying to push away the image that was forming in her mind. This wasn't just a sad past, it was a warning. She put the folder away again, closed the living room door, and returned to Camille's room. Camille's room. As she entered, the rhythmic sound of the machine seemed slower. She approached, adjusted the pillow, and that's when she heard it. A faint murmur drawn out as if coming from the depths of a nightmare. It was him. He didn't let me escape. Mary froze. "Who, my girl?" she asked, leaning in to listen better, her heart racing. But Camille didn't answer. Her breathing returned to slow and heavy. Mary stood there looking at her face, and an uncomfortable certainty began to form. Maybe that hit and run hadn't been an accident. Maybe someone had wanted to silence her, and in that moment she felt that she was no longer just caring for a patient. She was protecting a survivor. The hospital reception area was silent that morning, with only the distant sound of a phone ringing in some office. Mary was passing by, carrying a tray of files. When she saw the automatic door open, a tall, broad-shouldered man entered, dressed in an impeccable dark suit that didn't fit in at all with the place. He walked slowly, but with firm steps, as if he knew exactly where he wanted to go. The detail that made Mary hold her breath, however, was his smile. It wasn't warm. It wasn't polite. It was a calculated, cold smile, as if he were sizing up every person he encountered. He approached the counter, leaned in slightly to speak to the receptionist, and even from a distance, Mary could hear. "I'm looking for a patient, Camille Jameson." The receptionist started typing on the computer, but Mary stepped forward almost instinctively. "Excuse me, we don't have any patients with that name," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The man turned to her, still wearing the same fake smile, and stared at her for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. "Are you sure?" he asked in a calm tone, but with something that made her feel cold inside. "Absolutely sure," she replied without looking away, even though her heart was beating very fast. "You must have the wrong hospital." He remained silent, watching her as if he were trying to see through her lie. Then he smiled sidelong, turned around and walked out, pushing the automatic door open without hurrying. Mary stood still, feeling the weight of his presence, even after he disappeared down the street. The rest of her shift passed slowly, every step in the hallway echoing in her chest. When she was finally done, she walked to the parking lot. The cool air of the night enveloped her, but it brought her no relief. As she approached her car, something on the windshield caught her eye. A crumpled piece of paper held by the wiper. Mary took the note and opened it. Only 4 words written with a thick pen. "Stay out of it, nurse." She stood there with the note in her hands, the cold wind hitting her face, looking around. But the parking lot was empty. The threat was clear and worse, silent. The night was moonless, and the road to Sanro seemed longer than the first time. Mary drove with her fingers steady on the steering wheel, the flashlight on the passenger seat, and her heart beating fast, like someone who knows they are about to cross a line of no return. When she parked a few meters from the red house, she turned off the lights and stayed for a few seconds, breathing deeply, listening only to the distant sound of crickets and the rustling of dry leaves in the wind. The place looked even glorier in the darkness. She passed through the rusty gate and crossed the yard. The front door was still ajar. She entered slowly, the smell of dust and damp enveloping her once again. The dim light of the flashlight revealed the same scene. Old furniture, the blanket on the armchair, the heavy curtains. But this time, she wasn't there to look. She was there to search. She went through the rooms until she found at the end of a narrow hallway a door different from the others. It was more reinforced with a heavy iron bolt. She tried to turn the handle, but it was locked. She looked around, found a piece of rusty iron, and began to pry it open. The sound of metal scraping against the lock echoed down the hallway, and every second seemed like an eternity. With a click, the door gave way. The beam of light from the flashlight cut through the darkness and revealed a small, stuffy room that smelled of mold and rust. In one corner, women's clothes were scattered on the floor, some of them torn. To one side, chains were attached to the wall with dark marks on the metal. She had seen this before in movies about people being chained up. Mary felt her breath catch in her throat. The light from the flashlight then fell on an object on a shelf, a blue notebook covered in dust. She picked it up carefully. When she opened it, she saw that most of the pages had been torn out. But on the few that remained, there were short sentences written in shaky handwriting. "Dad says, I'm guilty. I don't want to die here." The words seemed to scream from those pages. Mary closed the diary slowly, as if she were holding something too fragile. Her stomach churned, and a bitter taste rose in her mouth. The weight of it wasn't just on the paper. It was as if each letter carried the fear and pain of entire years. And there, in that stifling room, she knew with absolute certainty what was hidden in Camille's life was much darker than she had imagined. The sun had not yet risen when Mary parked the car in front of the town police station. The diary was inside an old folder on the passenger seat, along with the photo she had found in the red house. She stared at the door of the building for a few seconds. Breathing deeply, she knew that the moment she handed it over, there would be no turning back. She went inside. The strong smell of burnt coffee and old paper filled the air. At the desk, a police officer on duty looked up from the newspaper and asked what she wanted. "I need to speak to the head of investigations," she said in a firm voice, but feeling her hand sweat. She was taken to a small room where a middle-aged man with a wrinkled shirt and a tired expression greeted her. "I'm Investigator Samuels. What can I do for you?" Mary sat down, opened the folder, and placed the newspaper and photo on the table. "This belongs to a patient of mine. She's been in a coma for months. She can't defend herself, but I believe she was the victim of something very serious. I think she was the victim of something very serious." Samuels took the photo first, looked at it for a few seconds, and turned it over to read the back. He then glanced through the newspaper, reading the hastily written phrases. "I believe she was the victim of something very serious." Samuels took the photo first, looked at it for a few seconds, and turned it over to read the back. Then he leafed through the diary, reading the hastily written sentences. His expression, which was already serious, became even harder. "Where did you find this?" he asked without looking up. "In a house in the town of Sanro, the Red House." The investigator closed the newspaper, took a deep breath, and looked at her in a way that made Mary feel a chill down her back. "You did the right thing bringing this in, but now I want you to listen to me carefully." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "I know the man who lives in that house. We've arrested him several times. Assault, threats, breaking other people's property, bar fights. That man is dangerous. Very dangerous. If he finds out that you're involved, he'll come after you. Don't trust anyone. Do you understand?" Mary nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words. "We're going to take action," he continued. "But until then, stay away from anyone who asks about her, even if they seem well-intentioned." As she left the police station, Mary hugged the empty folder to her chest. The sun was beginning to rise, but to her it seemed like the morning was colder than ever. The day began like any other, with the murmur of the hallways and the smell of coffee mingling with that of disinfectant. Mary was reviewing files when she saw two men enter Camille's room. One was wearing a white coat, but his face was unfamiliar to her. The other was dressed in formal attire and carrying a clipboard. She approached immediately. "What's going on here?" she asked, her gaze firmly alternating between the two. The man in the coat smiled in a rehearsed manner. "Nurse Carter, don't worry. We've been ordered to transfer the patient to another unit. Security issues, you understand?" Mary felt a knot in her stomach. "Orders from whom?" she insisted. The man in formal attire replied too quickly. "From the hospital board. Everything has already been authorized. We just need your signature as the person responsible for her care to release her for transfer." She took the paper he handed her. Her eyes scanned the printed lines, but the feeling that something was wrong only grew. There was no name of the doctor in charge or the hospital she was being taken to, just vague, poorly written terms. She looked up slowly. "And why didn't anyone tell me before?" she asked, crossing her arms. The man in the white coat tried to keep his voice calm. "It's all for your own good. It's better not to ask questions, Ma'am." The phrase sounded like an alarm in her ears. Mary handed back the paper without signing it. "No, as long as I'm on duty. She's not leaving here without direct orders from the director in charge and with an official document. He has to speak to me directly. No middleman." The man in formal attire frowned, annoyed. "You're making our job difficult." "I'm protecting my patient," she replied without raising her voice, but firmly. "If you want to get her out of here, you'll have to go through me, the hospital director, the police, and the people of the town." They looked at each other, and for a moment she was sure she saw impatience mixed with frustration on their faces. Without another word, they left the room, their hurried footsteps echoing in the hallway, looking down as if they were hiding from the cameras. Mary was left alone, looking at Camille, motionless in the bed. She approached and adjusted the blanket over her frail body. "I know this wasn't for security," she whispered. "And I'm not going to let them take you," she said. Going to security, she argued with them, called the director, and held meetings about hospital security and authorized access. The hospital filed a report at the police station. It was late afternoon when the phone in the nurses' station rang. Mary answered on the second ring, not imagining what she was about to hear. "Nurse Carter, this is Investigator Samuels." The voice on the other end sounded firm, but with a different weight. "We need you to know the man has been arrested." Mary sat up straight in her chair, her heart racing. "Arrested? Where?" "In a hotel a few miles from here. He was registered under a different name." There was a short pause before he continued. "He had his bags packed, and according to our information, he planned to finish what he started with the daughter. He used what he had to hire some thugs." The words spun around in her mind as if they didn't make sense. "Finish what he started" sounded like a cold sentence. "And did he say anything?" she asked, her voice trembling. Only that she should never have survived, that she was to blame for his wife's death. The silence that followed was heavy. Carter went for it. Very close, very close. Mary closed her eyes, feeling a lump in her throat. A mixture of anger, relief, and fear ran through her entire body. "Thank you for letting me know," she replied in a whisper. On the other end of the line, Samuels continued, "We don't know how long he'll be in prison, but for now she's safe, and that's thanks to you." When he hung up, Mary stood still for a few minutes, staring at the door to the room where Camille was resting. She entered slowly, approached the bed, and took her hand. "You have no idea how close you came, my girl," she murmured, feeling tears burn in her eyes. "But now he's never going to touch you again." The constant beeping of the monitor seemed softer, as if even the machine shared that silent relief. The room was enveloped in silence, lit only by the soft light coming through the window. It was early, and Mary was sitting in the armchair next to the bed, as she did every day. She was reading an old book, but her attention was divided. Part of her was always focused on the little girl sleeping there. The constant sound of the heart monitor was already part of the environment, a reminder that life was still beating. Mary sighed, closed the book, and adjusted the blanket over Camille's fragile body. Then something changed. First, a slight movement of the eyelids, then an almost invisible frown on the forehead. Mary leaned forward, her heart racing. Camille called out in a low voice, but full of hope, her eyes opened slowly, as if the light were too bright to face all at once. They stopped on Mary's, and for a moment the two just looked at each other, as if trying to confirm that this was real. Camille's mouth moved, and her voice came out weak hoarse from so many months of silence. "I'm sure now." Mary felt her chest tighten. She took her hand firmly, trying to pass on all the warmth she had in her heart. "Yes, my girl." "Are you sure?" Camille blinked slowly, and tears formed in the corners of her eyes. Mary couldn't hold back hers. She knelt down next to the bed, and the two embraced carefully, as if afraid that any sudden movement would break the moment. No more words were needed. The crying that came was not just sadness or relief. It was liberation. There, in that embrace, years of silence and fear were broken. And for the first time in a long time, there was room for something new. Peace. The room was quiet, with the afternoon light painting the walls a soft orange. Mary was arranging Camille's pillow, making sure she was comfortable. There was still a visible tiredness on the young woman's face, but there was also something new in her eyes. Life. Camille looked at her in silence, following her every move. When Mary finished, she sat down on the edge of the bed and smiled as she always did when she wanted to hide her concern. "Are you feeling better?" she asked, running her hand through her hair. Camille took a deep breath before answering. Mary said in a tone that made the nurse stop smiling and pay attention. The young woman's eyes filled with tears, and her voice came out low but full of certainty. "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here." Mary felt a lump in her throat. She tried to speak, but her emotions caught her words. "Oh, my girl," she managed to say, taking her hand. "Don't say that." Camille squeezed her fingers with what little strength she had, as if she wanted the nurse to understand that every word was true. "That's just how it is. You're not just the person who took care of me. You're my mom in my heart. It was impossible to hold back." Mary's tears fell silently as she brought Camille's hand to her face, feeling the fragile warmth of that skin. "Mom, in my heart," she repeated almost in a whisper, as if savoring a gift. The two remained there, holding hands while the world outside continued unhurriedly inside that room. However, time seemed to have stopped to preserve that moment. A simple moment, but so full of love that neither of them would ever forget it. The days in the hospital passed more peacefully after Camille woke up. But Mary knew that peace was fragile. The cold room, the constant noise of the monitors, the food served on metal trays. None of that was real life. Camille needed more than medicine. She needed a home. It was a Monday morning when Mary arrived at the hospital with a folder full of documents. She had spent nights filling out forms, going to meetings, and talking to social workers. She told Camille's story. She omitted some dangerous details, but she made it clear there was no family to take care of her, and she wasn't going to let them leave her to fend for herself. Weeks later, the authorization arrived. Mary cried alone in the car as she held the paper that said she could legally take charge of the young girl. The day she was discharged, Camille looked at the hospital door as if saying goodbye to a place that was both a prison and a refuge. Mary tucked the blanket around her shoulders and said, "Let's go home, my girl." The drive was silent, with Camille looking at the city through the window, her eyes absorbing colors and lights that seemed new after so much time in the shadows. When they arrived, Mary opened the door of a simple but lively little house, plants in the yard, photos on the walls, the smell of freshly brewed coffee. "Welcome," she said with a smile. "This is your place now." Camille walked slowly to the small room prepared for her. On the bed, a soft blanket, an embroidered pillow, and a new teddy bear were waiting for her. She sat down, touching everything as if to make sure it was real. "It's beautiful," she murmured with a trembling voice. Mary came over, sat down beside her, and put her arm around her shoulders. "It's not just a house, Camille. It's a home. Our home." Camille rested her head on her shoulder and closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she felt her chest lighten as if she could breathe without fear. And Mary knew then that she had kept a silent promise she made the day she decided not to let go of that hand. The house was filled with the smell of freshly baked cake and the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. It was a special day, exactly 1 year since Camille had opened her eyes in that hospital room. For Mary, that date was more important than any birthday, because it marked the rebirth of someone she considered her daughter. Camille spent the morning helping set the table, trying to hide her anxiety. Mary was busy in the kitchen, cutting fruit and arranging plates, when she felt a touch on her shoulder. "Mary?" Her voice came out soft, almost shy. The nurse turned around and saw the young woman holding a small blue box in her hands. "What's that, my girl?" Camille blushed, but her eyes were already filled with tears. "It's a gift. It's not just for today. It's for everything." Mary dried her hands on her apron and opened the box. Inside, a delicate necklace with a heart-shaped pendant sparkled in the afternoon light. She took it carefully and noticed that there was something engraved on it. She brought it closer to read it, and her vision blurred with tears. "Thank you for giving me life twice." Mary brought her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the tears. "Oh, Camille," she said with a broken voice, "it wasn't necessary." "Yes, it was," interrupted the young woman firmly. "You didn't just save my life. You gave me a home, love, and a mother." The two hugged each other tightly, as if they wanted to keep that moment forever. Mary felt her heart beating fast, but it was a soft beat, full of deep joy. When they separated, she put the necklace around her neck, her fingers still trembling, and looked at Camille. "Never take that pendant off," the young woman asked, smiling through her tears. "It's so you'll remember that even though we don't have the same blood, our bond is forever." Mary just nodded, squeezing her hand. And in that shared glance, without further words, it was clear that the love that united them was stronger than any blood bond. It was chosen love, love that saves. The hospital was quieter than usual that morning. Mary walked slowly through the corridors as if wanting to remember every detail. The distant sound of the monitors, the smell of disinfectant, the muffled voices of doctors discussing cases. Every corner of that place held memories of tears, hope, and goodbyes. She entered the staff room, took off her gown, and folded it carefully. She sat down for a moment, staring at the white fabric in her hands. How many years? 30 more. It was hard to count. In that time she had seen life begin and end many times. She had held cold hands, listened to last words, dried tears from families, and sometimes cried with them. But as she put the gown in the bag, she thought of Camille. She smiled to herself. Hours later, she was at home making coffee. When the young woman came through the door with a big smile, "Mom, why are you so pensive?" she asked, leaving her backpack on the couch. Mary turned around, rested her hands on the table, and took a deep breath. "Because today was my last shift." Camille's eyes widened. "What? You retired?" "Yes, my girl." Mary's smile was calm but filled with emotion. "I've saved many bodies in my life, but saving a soul." She paused, swallowing back tears. "That's priceless." Camille approached her and hugged her tightly. "And now, what are you going to do?" Mary looked into her eyes and caressed her face. Now I'm going to spend the rest of my life making you the happiest person in the world." The two stood there hugging each other, feeling the warmth that only a true home can give. And Mary knew with the sweetest certainty she had ever felt that this was the most important and beautiful job she would ever do in her entire life. The auditorium was full, but the silence was almost total. Doctors, nurses, nursing students, and some family members of patients filled the chairs, waiting for the special guest. On stage, a simple microphone, a table with a glass of water, and the low sound of someone testing the audio system. Mary was backstage adjusting her blouse and taking deep breaths. She wasn't there to talk about techniques or teach protocols. She was there to talk about something that can't be learned from a manual. When she entered, she was greeted with soft applause. She walked to the microphone and looked at the audience, pausing for a few seconds before beginning. "I spent more than 30 years of my life wearing a white uniform." She began with a calm but firm voice. "I saw people being born. I saw people pass away. I saw victories and defeats, but above all, I saw stories." She paused, letting the silence fill the room. "Many times we turn off machines without ever knowing what was really behind those closed eyes." She paused, letting the silence fill the room. "Many times we turn off machines without ever knowing what was really behind those closed eyes." And other times, her voice trembled a little. Other times, a life was saved because someone decided to simply take a hand. Some people in the audience looked down, moved by her words. "I want you to ask yourselves, what if it were you?" she said, looking at every corner of the auditorium or someone you love. "Would you want them to be just another number on a file? Or would you want someone to have the patience to wait, to listen, to believe?" Mary took a deep breath, feeling the emotion welling up. But she continued, "Maybe today someone needs you to just be there. Not to perform a miracle. Not to promise what you can't deliver, but to hold their hand and say, 'I'm here and I won't leave you.'" The audience was silent for a few seconds until loud, long applause began, growing until it filled the entire auditorium. Mary smiled with tears in her eyes and thought that if at least one person left there, determined to listen more and judge less, it would have been worth it. And deep down she knew that this was the real cure she had always wanted to offer. And then, after experiencing the story with us, tell me, what would you do in Mary's place? Would you have the courage to disobey orders and risk everything to save someone who might not even be able to hear you? Or if you were in Camille's place, would you trust a person who came into your life at the most difficult moment? I really want to hear your opinion. Leave it here in the comments because every point of view is important, and who knows, maybe your answer will help someone else see life in a different way. And don't forget to activate the bell to receive the next stories. Every video here is made to touch your heart like this one. Oh, and while you're here, don't miss the video that's appearing on your screen right now. It's a true story that has already made many people cry and reflect on the value of life. Click and watch it until the end, because I promise you'll never see the world the same way.